Hi, this is Dino Pisaniello. This is my commentary on the article by Blin and Munro. I actually found this to be quite an interesting and relevant paper, even though it's a bit dated, 2008. The paper is about disruption of academic teaching practices through technology and whether or not it actually does that. And the subtext of that is understanding the resistance to change through the lens of activity theory. It's an interesting paper, but I also wonder whether it's a debate about behaviourist education or constructivist education, and why hasn't technology led to more constructivist education? It seems that the VLE is meant to do that or facilitate that, but the current transition is still bogged down in relation to just adapting behaviourist educational practices within the VLE. So in their abstract they talk about most institutions having invested in a virtual learning environment and employing staff to support e-learning, but the net result so far is little evidence of significant impact on teaching practices, and current implementation being focused on improving administration and just replicating behaviourist content-driven models. In other words, not taking full advantage of the ability of these VLEs to facilitate constructivist style education. In their paper they talk about semiotic versus technological spaces and subjects creating objects, and that subjects are in context and objects are in context, and so without that context or without that motivation there won't be the outcomes that one would hope. So with the institutional adoption of VLEs, there has been an effort to tool up staff to become familiar with the tools. I'm using that in a double sense, aren't I? So staff are getting some form of training on how to use those tools, but they're not developing the competencies or adapting the skills towards constructivist learning. So the task-related competencies and what they call metafunctional competencies are not being developed. And so in the analogy with a functional organ, the organ is not doing the job that it's meant to do or could do because academic staff are not trained up and not using the full facilities of the VLE. In this paper they describe how Moodle has been adopted in their institution, and the advantage of using Moodle is that it enables staff to upload lecture notes and so on, which provides a distribution mechanism, if you like, but it doesn't go much beyond that. And in fact, with the limitations of the Moodle implementation, they actually are restricted in what they can do. And I think this is also the case at the University of Adelaide with their MyUni implementation of Blackboard. So a lot of the features that could be implemented are not being implemented for various reasons, and there's also the tension between what the university would like to do independently and what the vendor can do or should and tries to do with regards to the client. So this is in this blue highlighted section. Although the university-wide deployment of Moodle provides academic staff with opportunities to enhance and transform their teaching practice, it also introduced some constraints and limitations on staff and students' ability to use the platform in creative and efficient ways. So there's a limitation at the level of the VLE implementation. In their survey they found that the bulk of resources created by the faculties were text-based content, and not a lot in terms of discussion forums, assignments, quizzes, hot potatoes exercises and collaborative and reflective activities such as wikis and journal entries. So again, this is sort of harping back to a desire for more constructivist learning, but staff at this point in time are really just using a behaviourist approach in many cases. In their early stages in this survey, the preponderance of resources compared to activities, in other words, what's there and what sorts of things students could do to actively learn, suggests that Moodle courses generally mirror the corresponding face-to-face mode of delivery. The problem with some of this, of course, is that as students are able to access materials that look like just face-to-face lectures and so on, they're not going to attend the face-to-face lectures once they know that the distribution is available 24/7, and so it's a bit of a double whammy for the lecturers. Not only do they have to generate these recordings and so on, they're doing it on a smaller scale, and whatever constructivist activity they might have had in face-to-face sessions has become has more or less sort of reduced until such time as they can develop the skills to implement the constructivist learning using the VLE. Now, as far as the university is concerned, what the authors argue is that it may have shifted the mode of dissemination and satisfied students to some extent, and may also represent a cost and time saving for the university in terms of printing and photocopying. There's little transformation of teaching practices. Now, in terms of, say, the University of Adelaide, online learning and distribution of materials shifts the emphasis to the students in their own private home. Printing charges and so on go to the student, and so therefore there's a little bit of cost shifting going on, some saving in terms of infrastructure, not as many lecturing spaces required as in the past. Now, I did a back of the envelope calculation some years ago on whether or not this was going to be a saving, and I estimated that it was probably going to cost 60% of the usual charges in traditional face-to-face learning and lectures, so around about a 40% saving for the universities. Now, that doesn't factor in the time that academics have to spend to construct their courses and develop them for an online environment. So I just wonder whether overall there's a net gain for the university. On the other side of the coin, just because it's there, why do you have to use all the features of VLEs? It's a bit like most other forms of software. You've got lots of options, but do you have to use all those options, and are the lecturers being trained to use those options? And so the uptake of the advanced features is probably a function not only of their knowledge to use the advanced features, but also whether they perceive it to be necessary pedagogically. So in the background, if you're a constructivist teacher, yes, you can use these things more effectively. If you're a behaviourist type teacher, or somebody teaching in disciplines where constructivist approach probably isn't as obvious as in others, then why should you? One positive benefit of using these VLEs is that it makes you think about the organisation of the teaching. The organisation of the module is much clearer. It gives a good sense of the shape of the course. So Moodle and Blackboard, in that sense, are very good mechanisms by which you can not only deliver effective learning, if you so desire, and if you've been trained to do so, but also it potentially helps to predetermine and shape the design of learning activities. In the quotation there, Moodle has helped me organise my teaching material in a more systematic way and freed me up to concentrate more on pedagogical or pedagogic aspects of teaching. So in conclusion, there may not have been as much disruption of teaching practices one might imagine if the argument is put forward that these VLEs enable constructivist teaching. Now, my view, to some extent, is that this is a debate about behaviourism versus constructivism, and for some people, some lecturers have been brought up on behaviourism, going to constructivism through these VLEs and so on is a hard road. It's not impossible, of course, if the training is provided, but there's also a shift required in thinking as to how you go about your teaching. Not everyone would argue that constructivist learning is the best and only way of teaching. So overall, a very nice paper, lots of food for thought. There are some very relevant points, even though it is an oldish type paper. In our school, we're seeing more disruption than one might have predicted based on this paper. I think a lot of staff are adopting these technologies with some gusto, and we're seeing the results. Whether we see the results in outcomes for students is another matter. Whether we see this as somehow increasing student numbers is another matter, but we're certainly making a shift in this direction, and I suspect that the shift will keep going for at least another year or two. So thank you.